It's our second episode.
It is. And we have another fabulous author coming for lunch.
Great, who is it?
Kelly Rimmer. She's an Australian author, but she's done so well internationally.
Fantastic. I can't wait to meet her.
Today I've got Australian author Kelly Rimmer coming over for lunch. I have tried to come up with a menu inspired by Kelly's book, which is set in Alabama. So, what I'm cooking is Alabama slow-cooked ribs. And to begin with, we simply marinate the ribs. So I have here brown sugar, cumin, salt and pepper. And I simply mix them together. And then we marinate the ribs. It's really actually very easy. It's just a matter of shaking the brown sugar and cumin mixture over them, giving it a little bit of a stir, covering them, and then I just put them in the fridge to marinate for a couple of hours. The longer it marinates, the better, Kelly says, but because she's coming for lunch, we've only got a few hours. And then while these are marinating, I simply get the barbecue sauce ready. So, to make the barbecue sauce, I simply just melt the butter over a low heat and then add the fresh garlic and the onion powder and just let that slowly melt together. And then one by one, I add the other ingredients, the stock and the apple cider vinegar and the lovely sticky molasses, the honey and the mustard, and just slowly stir it all together and then leave it to simmer for quite a long time till it gets quite nice and thick. And when it's time to cook the ribs, I simply add half of the barbecue sauce over the ribs, and then in 5 hours time, when they're all soft and juicy and tender, then I add the other half of the barbecue sauce just prior to serving up. I'm really hoping that this is going to be a great meal for Kelly Rimmer. We are here today with Kelly Rimmer, enjoying her new book, Before I Let You Go, here on Word of Mouth TV. Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about the book, please?
Sure. It's the story of two sisters, Annie and Lexi, who live in Alabama. Lexi is a doctor, she's quite successful, and Annie has heroin addiction. So together they have to deal with the legal consequences of Annie's addiction because she's been using heroin when she's pregnant.
And how did you get the first inspiration for that book?
I just set out to write about sisterhood and addiction. Sisterhood inspired by my relationship with my own sisters. There's 3 of us and we are all completely different. It's amazing that we came from the same family, but we're still close. And that relationship has fascinated me because you can go through times where you just can't stand aside of each other, and then the next day you're best friends again. And it's such a unique bond. So I wanted to write about sisterhood. And I wanted to write about addiction. My uncle died of a heroin overdose about 20 years ago. And so I wanted to, as a writer, sometimes use my research as a way to understand things that really trouble and perplex me. Yes. So that's where I started.
An outlet, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Like a kind of cheap therapy. When I started researching that, though, I really quickly came across this issue of how pregnant women with addictions are treated by the US legal system in some states, and that became a bit of an obsession. So
right.
I have the book.
Yes, it was a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. And I went from the beginning to the end. And and it was so sensitive too because I was thinking, heroin and things like that is such a heavy topic. It's not usually the sort of book that I would read, but then as soon as I got it, I was hooked.
Oh, thank you.
So Kelly, we've cooked Alabama slow-cooked ribs today. I believe this is a favourite recipe of yours and your family. Can you tell us all about it?
Yes, my children are obsessed with ribs, and I like this recipe because I kind of put it on at lunchtime and then don't really have to think about it till about 5 o'clock just before we eat. But it's just sticky and tasty and very tender.
Well, that's a coincidence, isn't it, that you set your book in Alabama? and this was a favourite recipe. Like,
Yes.
the universe must have been sort of drawing you towards it. Yeah.
Who knows? The inspiration's been percolating away in the back of my mind for years.
In your oven. It's been percolating away in your oven. Yeah.
Kelly, I really wanted to ask you about your journey to being an author. Have you always wanted to write?
Yes. Yes, I read Heidi when I was 8, and that was it. That was all I wanted to do. So I have always written. In fact, answering the question, when did you start writing, is I don't remember not writing. So I always just wrote, and as I got older, the stories got longer. And by the time I was a teenager, I was kind of cranking out, short novella length stories. But, in the back of my mind, I always thought that I would be a writer. That was always what I was going to do. But of course, when you're 15 and you say, I'm going to be an author, people say, I hope you have a backup plan, which is not necessarily terrible advice, but it did mean that I did lots of other interesting things, and writing was my hobby.
I really loved the character of Annie, and I found her part of the novel really moving, and I was just wondering what it was like for you, stepping inside the skin of someone who was addicted to heroin. How did you write her so well?
She actually started out a painter. She wasn't going to be a writer, but I wanted to write her in very much with the thought in mind that this could have been me, because it could be any one of us.
Yeah.
And so the first draft, she was painting lovely flowers and sunflowers, but I have no visual eye for anything, and I wanted to really empathise with her. So I changed her to be a writer, so she had something in common with me, because when I'm writing about my characters, I want them to feel like a friend that I've connected with.
Yeah.
And so that's how Annie became who she was.
Annie's perspective is written in the form of a diary. What gave you the idea to use an addict's diary as a tool?
I and most of the other writers I know at some point kept a journal, so it seemed a really natural way for her to express herself.
Yeah.
And it gives you such an intimate look into someone's thoughts, a journal, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a really good way to give us a window into what was going on for Annie, throughout the story.
One of the scenes that absolutely broke my heart was towards the end of the book, when the paramedics were, essentially saying, oh, here we go, just another addict. And, Lexi was there completely heartbroken, saying, she's not just another addict, she's my sister. I mean, even talking about it now, I've got tears welling up in my eyes, I have a sister. That scene just really struck me very hard, just how heartbreaking it would be to be in that situation.
Yeah, and when I think back, like the original idea to write about addiction came from my uncle, who was the best guy. Yeah. He really was. And all my memories of him, there's one or two that are discordant, but 99% of my memories of him are of him being amazing. And behind the scenes, there was this immense struggle going on that had effectively destroyed big chunks of our family. I mean, I don't want to minimise how difficult it was, but underneath all that, he was a great guy, and he was one of the heroes of my childhood. So I wanted to write about Annie in the same way.
Yeah. And I was going to say as well, like we can be modestly sympathetic to people with mental illness or a physical illness that you can see, but when it comes to addiction, we're so judgmental. We don't tell the mentally ill. Sometimes people do behave normally, or a person without a leg, why don't you try and walk? But an addict, it's like you can make a choice, and so there you've got someone like Annie who's pregnant, who one doesn't even know she's pregnant, and gets targeted by the law, and two who would struggle regardless. Like it's not something you can just say, oh, I'm not going to be an addict today.
Yeah.
What was the biggest joy in writing this book?
Well, I knew that I would dedicate the book to my uncle, my dad's brother, and my dad doesn't normally read my books. And so when I had finished the draft, I asked him to read it, and he was texting me, telling me how much it moved him. And that was all of the struggle of the research and the months of writing. It was just in that moment, everything was worthwhile. It was so wonderful.
Oh, that's just beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I'd really love to know more about your path to publication. How did you get your first book published?
It was something that I always wanted to do, but the barriers seemed insurmountable. And I also was writing was something I did for myself, and it was something I did in private, and I was really worried about how I would go getting negative feedback. So I had written a novel when I was in my early 20s, And when I was in my early 30s, it occurred to me that time was getting away and I still hadn't done anything with my writing. So I rather impulsively self-published it. Like I decided to self-publish it at like 11 and it was self-published by 11:30 before I could back out. And I got lots of lovely feedback and some negative feedback, and it didn't really faze me too much. So I thought, actually, maybe I can do this. So I started looking around for publishers, and it all seemed very difficult. But I made a spreadsheet with all the publishers I was going to submit another book that I had finished some years earlier to. And the first publisher I submitted it to was a digital publisher in the UK called Bookercher, and they took it. And then they wanted another book, so I wrote another book, and then another, and then another.
That is such a wonderful story, and I think that's the kind of story that's going to give hope to so many aspiring authors. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
And thank you for sharing with us Word of Mouth TV.
Thank you for joining us. And if you want to enter the draw for our giveaway, just press the subscribe button at the bottom of our YouTube channel. And if you want to know more about our fantastic prizes for this week's episode, or about today's recipes, or all about book news, views and reviews, then just go to our website at wordofmouthtv.com.au. See you next time.